Right, we are live. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Graham. Good evening, everyone who's here
Yeah,
or
good.
not.
I don't know who is going to be here, partly because of the different day, and partly because I screwed up the announcement because I can't understand time zones. So I said it was going to be at 2000 UTC when it's going to be at 1800 UTC, which is now. But
Okay,
it,
so we're here, but maybe not anybody else is.
no, that is true, and because I'm looking at IRC, I can't actually see who is live. Anyway,
Right.
so let's get on with talking amongst ourselves and give people time to drop in, I guess. So you
Yeah.
you mentioned that you thought Next was the best, or not even the best, but the only reasonable Unix operating system.
Yes.
Carry on.
Um. So, as you know, I started reading. I've been rereading the Unix Haters Handbook,
Yeah.
and um, the interesting thing that I find is that the people that came to the Unix Haters Handbook um, all used Unix every day, and they were
Hmm.
intimately familiar with its internals because back then it was smaller too. But most of them came from systems that were better than Unix, and so back in the '90s we had Amigas and we had things that were not Unix. There was VMS. There was in the '80s and the early '90s there was the incompatible time sharing system at MIT, which I think was a Lisp based thing. There were Lisp machines from Symbolics. There were Smalltalk machines. There were a whole bunch of things that weren't one of Unix or Windows.
Hmm.
And the people that loved these things that weren't Unix or Windows weren't, despite the anti forward from Dennis Ritchie in the Unix Haters Handbook, these people weren't necessarily um, hating Unix because they didn't like it or hating Unix because they had sour grapes about their own thing losing. But they they hated Unix because it was worse than the thing they came from in ways that they spent a few hundred pages talking about. And fast forward 25 years, and the entire world that is not Windows is now uh, built on some form of Unix, which makes a whole bunch of assumptions about what an operating system contains. The one assumption that I find most not offensive necessarily, but weird is that Unix and Windows as well assume that there will be a file system, for instance, and that the file system will behave in a certain way. And that wasn't necessarily true on the things that came before Unix, but it's been true on Unix since. So for those of you that haven't read the Unix Haters Handbook, I recommend it. It ages well in that if you squint a little bit and change some of the words, you'll recognize a lot of the things they talk about,
Yeah, change
even
mega
if
to giga, and it's like 21st century. Yeah.
right. But also, if you replace there's an entire chapter called SnoozeNet on Usenet, and they talk about here's how interactions go down on Usenet.
Hmm.
And if you replace Usenet with social media, it is perfectly timely,
Yeah.
um, and it predicts a lot of sort of the contention and the arguing and some of the more toxic aspects of what we find on Twitter and Facebook and so on. But the thing that I've been thinking about is we had this Unix operating system which they describe as a virus, and it's perfect. It's a perfect description. A virus is simple so that it can replicate. It's simple to implement. It takes over its host, and so on. Um, and I think all the things they say about Unix being a virus are also true of JavaScript, which is another sort of modern tie if you just squint just the right way. But there were a whole bunch of implementations of Unix, and at that time they were all wildly incompatible. And this is why this is reflected in Paul Henning Camp, um, who's involved in the FreeBSD project and popularized the phrase bike shedding. Wrote an article about this, about how GNU Auto Tools is looking for different, whether LD can take the -L flag, I think, which every LD in use for the last 20 years has been able to take.
I think he
And
called that the generation lost in the bazaar.
yeah, I think you're right. And so GNU Auto Tools is problematic, but it was really important at the time because there were a lot of incompatible versions of Unix. And we've sort of solved or papered over a lot of the incompatibilities, but we still have, wildly different ideas. So one of the things that comes up a lot, and there was a Twitter conversation about this before I took my vacation. Somebody said they had switched from CentOS or Red Hat or whatever to Ubuntu. And a couple of comments were to the effect of, oh, well, they're basically the same thing because they're both Linux. It's just, you just replace, apt with DNF and depackage with RPM and you're golden. But that couldn't be further from the truth. CentOS and Red Hat derived Linux distributions, I would argue, are completely different operating systems than Debian-based distributions. And I would argue further that that FreeBSD and OpenBSD and NetBSD are closer to each other than Red Hat-based distributions of Linux and Debian-based distributions of GNU and Linux are the same. I think that so basically we had this problem where everybody was building their own thing on Unix and they were trying to make it different enough and the same enough to claim that it was Unix and compatible, and different enough to provide sort of value or whatever. And I think that Next Step was the only company that really got this done well, because they provided, what you and I refer to as the whole widget, right? They said, okay, look, we're going to do, and not to say that Sun didn't, but Next Step said, here's a whole library of development tools, and here are the things that that we think will make great applications. And when Unix wasn't up to the task, AppKit came to your rescue. And I really think that Next Step was sort of the best the best Unix, because it got so far away from Unix that if you used Next Step applications, you could pretend that it wasn't Unix. And that's comes to a further conversation that I was having today, that somebody who I respect said, I'm not an Apple guy, I'm a Unix guy. So BSD being underneath is good to me. And if you add Homebrew, then it's a serviceable system. And that's totally true, although less true with every release of macOS. But the things that I want from Unix are all available on macOS. And the things that I want that Unix that other Unixes don't do well are also available on macOS. And that's where I see GNU Step and the free software platforms. That's the disconnect. That's what's missing. Is the applications and that's one of the things that I think is missing, and that's one of the things that I think is really important, is the applications and the integration between the applications and so on. And that's what macOS does really well. And so I think I've said before on this stream, the reason why I use macOS is because it's Unix enough that I can do my Unix-based work in it. But it's also humane enough that I can do my human-based work in it. And if anything, for me, this stream is about making free software more humane. And I think that that's what GNU Step brings to free software platforms, is the opportunity for us to make more humane systems out of a thing that is inherently inhumane. And so that's sort of my line of thinking these days, is that what we get from, what we can get from free software platforms is if we add humanity to the free software platforms, then we can do really special things, because that's what is missing. And then finally, the other thing we've talked about recently is that a lot of the humanity and the humane things that we expected of macOS are actually lies anyways. Graham and I both recently went all in on iCloud. I was using Nextcloud exclusively for a while, and we both went all in on iCloud because we figured, well, since if we're going to take a break from, you know, multiple systems and so on, and just go back to using Macs most of the time, then maybe going all in on the Apple services is the right thing to do too. And actually, I don't notice any differences aside from my photo library. Um, I don't notice any positives out of being on iCloud. In fact, Nextcloud was a lot better in most ways. Um, so I think that that's an important thing to think about as well. And I need to catch up on chat. Matthew Scala says Auto Tools is in past tense. I wrote M4 code for it yesterday. I don't think Matthew's right. Auto Tools isn't past tense, but I think it should be. I think that the problems that Auto Tools solves don't exist as much today as they used to. We just don't have a working alternative yet. And that's one of the things that I would like to see more humane software brought around. Anyways, that's sort of a brain dump. Graham, you should jump in with and dump out your brain now.
So yeah, I think on the topic of Auto Tools specifically, first hi Eugene19, hi Matthew Scala, hi Dan Fultron. Glad you all found us despite my abysmal attempts to do time zone maths and tell you when the stream was going to be live. So well done for correctly misinterpreting my statements about when we would be live. So on Auto Tools, like it depends on what you're doing. Like so GNU Step Make isn't an alternative to Auto Tools, but it is an abstraction over the top, and that's quite a powerful thing. You can just configure your. Oh, and hi John, Q coding. You do configure once to tell GNU Step Make how your system works, and then you are writing in an abstract layer above it, whether you're doing MinGW on Windows or like FreeBSD as we're doing, or GNU Linux or whatever it is, and then other environments have built their own sort of equivalent coping strategies. Like CMake is popular in C++, or a bunch of people just use like Python or JavaScript or anything that again you are abstracting away from the system. On the sort of the topic of Next, I mean obviously like I'm a fan of NextStep, the operating system, and thus of Mac OS 10 and of GNU Step on whatever Unix like platform I'm running at the time. And for me at the time, the time that I got introduced to NextStep, it was about sort of Objective-C, and it also helped me that like all of the text fields had Emacs key bindings. So the fact I had already learned how to use Emacs gave me a load of like transferable productivity boosts. Later, I've come to sort of think of NextStep as quite a good compromise on trying to build an Alto-like system at a lower price point. Now, obviously, they didn't quite do the lower price point all that well, right. Although that was partly motivated by, I can't remember whether it was a legal settlement or whether they settled out of court, but Apple accused Next of poaching their staff because Steve Jobs poached their staff. And so they ended up with a non-compete agreement where they said that they wouldn't sell into the sort of personal computing space. So probably their price point reflected a need to not be seen as a personal computer as much as it reflected like the bill of materials. And then you reverse engineer the bill of materials from the price point you've come up with. So it is a really interesting platform from a technical perspective, and definitely a compromise design and a good compromise. And like you, I kind of came in as a Unix first, and then next Mackie person second. I remember the first time I went to Apple's developer conference was 2005, and at the they always have like this big problematic beer drinking festival on like the Thursday night of the conference, and it used to be at the time the conference was in San Francisco, and the big problematic beer drinking festival was in the middle of Infinite Loop on the sort of grass lawn in Cupertino, which obviously has a bunch of logistics challenges because you've got to get the admittedly small at the time, like 3,000 attendees from San Francisco to Cupertino during the 3 hours of this party and get them back during the 3 hours of this party as well. And they had like a little store of WWDC related swag in the conference center, and they had their main like Apple store. There's a campus store in one of the Infinite Loop buildings, although it isn't there now. It's now at Apple Park, and they had a T-shirt that had 3 words. So this was around the time of Tiger, and the Tiger was being pre-released, so it was around the time of Panther, and so their theme was all black, and it was like black T-shirt with dark grey writing on it. It had 3 words. It said air, water, Unix, and there were enough people in like worldwide developer relations who presumably like specified a T-shirt for that to be like the message that they put on this T-shirt, and that was the T-shirt that I bought. They were also like they were very big on sponsoring like the Unix and free software and large integrated systems like industry at the time. So they had like deep partnerships with O'Reilly. They had like the UK Unix users group. Apple were heavy sponsors of the presumably Bay Area Next group and similar groups in the United States. And they would put speakers up, and they invited speakers from that community. So I definitely met Randall L. Schwartz and Brian D. Foy, 2 big Perl community programmers at the conference, and Guido van Rossum was doing one of the sort of brown bag lunch talks. And that was sort of the hook that got me into this platform, was that it was it, like you say, sort of the humane version of like Unix. I thought of it as it's like Linux, but if you close the lid on your laptop still works when you open the lid again.
Right.
Yeah, so from that sort of technology perspective, that makes perfect sense. But obviously, there's only a tiny number of us who care about that, particularly when you are at like Apple business size, and if you're at next business size, then the fact that there's only a tiny number of people who care about that is an intense problem, because it means there's nobody to sell your shit to. And I think the Sun workstations, which had a very different approach to UI design, to like networking infrastructure, to operations. So very despite them both being like Unix platforms, the Next Step approach and the Sun approach were very, very different. But the Sun approach was good enough, and Sun was a good enough name that people would just buy the Sun one and wouldn't worry about the next one. And so as we saw, Sun were able to weather everything except the 2008 financial crisis, which is what happens if you sell computers to all of the banks.
Right. I think this is also underlined by Later when Apple did their server lines, the Xserve and so on, that appealed to the Unix nerds who wanted to run the same thing in the data center they were running on their desktops, but it clearly didn't appeal to the people who were doing the purchasing.
No, right.
It was it it, it was an interesting time because I came from a lifelong history of Debian and hacking in Perl and Python and so on. Um, and what the Mac offered for me and what Next Step would have offered for me um, was to be able to do that stuff and also be able to buy applications from people that care about it. I often tell people the reason I use a Mac is because of the command key, the Emacs key bindings everywhere. The fact that I can buy commercial software from people. Oh, I don't necessarily want to buy commercial software, but I can buy software from people who care about the things that I care about, and I can still also run all of the other stuff that I like as well. I came from sort of, I was a follower of Jamie Zawinski at the time, and he was during his Netscape days, he was talking a lot about how, I remember one post he made, I finally got a real computer on my desk, and he was talking about an SGI Indy. And, those sort of workstation providers, I think we've talked before on this stream about how, Apple basically is now, or at least very recently was the only, proper Unix workstation provider that where you could get the whole widget, and there's a lot of value in that, even for a free software hippie like me. There's a lot of value in having a computer that you know that that works, and that doesn't have so much fragmentation and so on. And when I think back about the things that I liked about the the Unix workstations, in particular the SGI stuff, because I used an O2 for a while as my main machine. For many years of my Mac using time, I was a Mac user because of this is a Unix workstation that somebody will support.
So I had to set up the FreeBSD box for this stream, and I think like FreeBSD doesn't suffer. You mentioned this before. FreeBSD doesn't suffer from the fragmentation that the sort of GNU Linux community world. Key coding has asked an interesting question, which is definitely going to be the next topic after what we've discussed. After we've sort of run this,
it's almost like he knows who we are.
It is almost like we worked together for some time, yeah. The FreeBSD is a good operating system, a solid operating system. Many people use it in many contexts. The thing that I disliked most about setting it, so let me start on a positive. The thing I liked most about setting it up is that I set it up exactly how I wanted. I was originally going to replicate the environment from the Live Step CD, which was done on FreeBSD 12.1, which is now out of support. And I got to a point. I thought, actually, no, I prefer the window maker look and feel, and I prefer the default Live Step theme. I'm just going to stop here. And I haven't got if I did this on some modern Linux distribution, I would have about 3/4 of KDE running in the background, but just not showing any of its UI, and I'd have to work out how to turn that off. There'd be some meta package I'd uninstalled, and then I'd have to work out which bits of it I needed to install again in order to get everything I needed back. And
2/3 of GNOME at the same time.
Right, and that isn't true for the FreeBSD desktop. However, on the other hand, I had to type my Wi-Fi SSID and PAK into a text file using VI in order to get the thing on the network, and that is nonsense. I'm sorry, but that is nonsense.
It completely is. I have a to-do list item that's several years old to write a GNU step Wi-Fi configuration utility that works on OpenBSD and FreeBSD. Maybe that'll be a topic for a future stream.
Yeah, maybe because like you say, what the Mac does well, or what the Apple ecosystem does well. Because now I do want to broaden it, and I want to address Q Coding's point or
Yeah,
question.
me as well.
What the Apple ecosystem does well is its version of ubiquitous computing, which is something that we're still missing from Xerox PARC. If you look at like Apple's video of the knowledge navigator from the John Scully era, was very much influenced by Alan Kay, who was still working for Apple as a distinguished fellow at the time. It's an iPad with Siri. There's no two ways about it. It's got a stupid little man in a suit with a bow tie avatar, to make it look like you're talking to your butler rather than talking to your tablet. But
Right, Bob Clippy.
yeah, but it is an iPad with Siri, and it takes all of your data and all of your contacts, and it integrates all of those to give you a consistent presentation on what your day looks like, what meetings you've got coming up, what files you need to access in order to progress with your day, all of that stuff. Apple do that for the most part very, very well. Their services have historically been a weak point. I don't think they're a weak point anymore, but I think that their model causes their version of ubiquity to be worse than it, or to not be what it could be. It's based around the idea now that your phone is the center of your life. If you have a desktop, then it's probably a peer with your phone in some variety, and that they can get files between each other and photos and all of that kind of stuff. But if you've got a watch, then the watch is like an adjunct to your phone. If you've got an Apple TV, then you can share stuff from your phone or your tablet or whatever to it. But there's this sort of hub and spoke model that they have always had, and I think the thing that Xerox PARC Ubiquitous Computing had was that the hub is me. It's not any of the computers that I own. Now, the closest thing to me, although ironically I've taken it off because it keeps getting the vocal trigger while I'm streaming, but the thing that is closest to me, is my watch, because I'm literally wearing it. It is stuck to my body, and also because of the way that Apple have done their security, it is permanently unlocked while it's stuck to my body. That means that should be the central device. That should be the thing that has a SIM card in. And if I decide to use a phone and someone calls the SIM card that's in my watch, then that phone should ring, not my iPhone. And if I am using a computer like that, it should become my computer. Now, Sun actually did that fairly well with their Sunray ultra thin client model with the smart cards. You could pull your smart card out and the screen would lock, and then you could go to another Sunray, push your smart card in, and you got your desktop back. That it was based on physical card technology because that's what existed at the time. But that kind of thing, if you just replaced the words Java card with smartwatch, you would have a much better model of PARC's ubiquitous computing than any of the vendors are giving us at the moment. And I pick on Apple because they are the most advanced at this integration side of things of any of the vendors. And before I finally cede control of the microphone back to Stephen, I want to express my belief that this is one of the things that the free software, I can't say that the free software community needs to do better, because that's such a broad and diverse community with so many different interests that it's a nonsense to say. But there is, let me put it this way, there is a gap in the in what is offered by free software of that kind of well integrated ubiquitous computing, and it's because I think of the bizarre model, the bazaar model. It is because the people who are contributing to like a bunch of apps on F-Droid aren't the people who are contributing to a bunch of apps on KDE and aren't contributing to whatever like Nextcloud that's going to do the integration. So no matter whether like the GNOME Foundation or like the KDE project creates some sort of consensus around integration and around ubiquity, they haven't got control of enough of the parts to actually build a ubiquitous environment.
Yeah, this is, and there have been attempts. I mean, there was the Ubuntu phone, and the KDE folks do a really good job of this. Actually, sort of, at least trying to make an entire computing environment. One thing that I was just thinking as you were talking about the Sunrays, which were a technology that I loved. One of my early contracts was to basically implement that at a place called Production Schoolhouse, which was a vocational school which taught media stuff. So they did 3D stuff on SGIs, they did desktop publishing on Macs, and they did web programming on Linux machines. And it depended actually, but on Unixy, free software Unix machines. And what they wanted was for the students to be able to sit at any computer across those 3 operating systems and get their home directories and all their files and things. Yeah. And that was a hard problem to solve, but we ended up just making a bespoke solution for them. But it occurs to me that there are several Macintosh computers in my house right now, and my wife and I now both have Apple Watches. There's no reason why I should have to pick up my laptop. I'm already wearing my Apple Watch, and if I have iCloud Drive enabled with sharing my desktop and documents folders, there's no reason why I should have to worry about which computer I pick up, because my Apple Watch can already identify me. That would be an interesting fix.
And interestingly, that's something that Next tried to emulate with the hardware that they had available at the time. Going back to to John's question of what's missing from Smalltalk, one of the things is the idea of the personal image, and the way that this was emulated on the first Next, on the very first cubes. And by the way, when I say emulated, I also should caveat this by saying emulated so badly that they gave up very quickly, was that you had your environment on your magneto-optical disk. The sort of massive, like bigger than a floppy disk, probably like slightly bigger than a CD-ROM in a plastic case thing that contained your operating system and your home directory and your files and everything on it. And the idea was that you didn't like take this ridiculous, massive, heavy magnesium alloy cube with you. You took your magneto-optical disk with you, and when you went up to a Next cube, you booted your version of NextStep with your stuff and your apps and your files. Now, like from a purely pedantic technological perspective, it wasn't a Smalltalk image model because it had a file system and it had a Unix and a separate graphical layer and all that stuff. But from a like personal computing perspective, that meant that every computer was your computer if you stuck your disk in the front.
Yeah, there were a group of people in Toronto back in the early to mid 2000s, and I'm going to get back to John's question as well, because I have written thousands of words about my thoughts on this recently, and I'm going to speak maybe a few hundred of them. But there was a group in Toronto that did a similar thing with the Sharp Zorus. They decided that the Sharp Zorus was a computer that was powerful enough for email and so on, and so they built docking stations that would plug into a monitor, and then they offloaded a lot of the processing to whatever server was available on the local network. And so there's a group of people at like the Toronto Hackspace and a few companies that their computing image was the PDA in their pocket, and they would plug it into a dock, and then they would have all of their data, which was on their PDA, on a memory card in their Sharp Zorus, but they also then had the computing resources that were available on the network. And so that was an interesting thought too, but it wasn't complete except for this group of people. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is sort of, you know, if we ignore history and where we are now, how did we get here, and how, what might it look like if we had made different turns? And so one of the premises that I'm driving these thoughts from is that there was a fork in the road in, let's say, the mid to late 80s, maybe the mid 80s to the mid 90s, where we could have followed other computing platforms to our destination, and we could have, made a different turn and followed Unix to our destination. And the thought technology that I'm installing is that Unix was a wrong turn. And what would computing look like today if we had not made the wrong turn? And how do we get back to that place? I have already written and published about my love for the Newton message pad. And there's a fantastic documentary called Love Notes to Newton, which if you Google for that, you will get the thing. I think it costs $5. You should definitely download it and watch it. It talks about people who love the Newton message pad and still use them at the time that the documentary was made a few years ago. But for me, because of my various ways that my brain works that isn't the same as other people's, I carried a Casio PDA, which was just like a membrane keyboard with a little bit of memory in it for address book and notes and scheduling and stuff, to elementary school. Partly because I was a nerd, definitely, but also because my brain doesn't allow me to to remember things in the same way that other people's do. I'm not going to give those things names, but you can assume what those names are. I think I already have outed myself as self-medicating for ADHD on this stream, so I can claim that one. But I've been dealing with this using various utilities to varying degrees of success for basically my entire life. And when the Newton message pad came along, I had a device that had my entire brain in it, and it recognized my handwriting. And that's not because my handwriting was poor and the handwriting recognition was poor. It was because my handwriting is very good, and the handwriting recognition was good enough. And the Newton message pad was amazing, but and that's what I want. That's what I wanted the iPad to be. That's what I wanted the iPhone to be. Of course, I want them to be free software based, but what I want is the Newton message pad. And the Newton message pad, though, can't work in today's society, because the Newton message pad comes from a place where you bought the hardware from a company that you trust. You bought some software applications and maybe some expansion hardware from companies from vendors that you could trust, because you had a customer vendor relationship with them, and you paid them money, and they were able to pay their staff with the money that you paid them, and so on. And that's not the way the world works anymore. You can't trust the vendors anymore. I don't trust a single vendor whose app I install on my phone. I trust zero of them. I trust them to varying degrees. I live in a Google free household, and if I am forced to use Google anything for work reasons, I put it in a completely different web browser, usually touching a different network, just because I really, really do not trust Google. I also don't trust Apple, but I trust them a lot more than I trust other vendors. And I definitely don't trust Facebook or anybody else. And so you can't have a Newton message pad because they had shared memory, and they can access all of the data. Every app can access all of the data on every device. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, as a Smalltalk nerd, what does a modern Smalltalk look like? What does the world look like in 2021 if, instead of taking the wrong turn down the Unix road, we took the right turn, I'm going to say, down the Smalltalk road? What does that look like? And it turns out that because of the design, the simplicity of the design of Smalltalk and the things that they were thinking about at the time, very little about Smalltalk actually has to change to implement features like shared memory and things like that. So one of my side projects that I'm hacking on, and it is a series of ARM assembly and C source code that I've copy and pasted from various places, so I can't share it because the licenses are almost definitely incompatible, but I'm hacking on it, is I want my Raspberry Pi 4 to boot into a Smalltalk VM and be my computer. And then when I plug in multiple Raspberry Pi 4s, I want all of those to be my computer. And so that's one of the things that I'm thinking about now. But I think that practically, because of the proliferation or popularity of Mac OS and the next step lineage of that, I think that practically our real efforts are best spent on GNU Step and things like this to bring the good stuff from Mac OS over to free software platforms. And that's why we do this stream. But I think that what they wanted at Xerox PARC when they made Smalltalk is what I still want out of a computing environment. I still want the digital representation of everything in my brain, and I want it everywhere with me. And I want it to be there whether I'm using a ridiculously powerful computer with a keyboard and mouse, or trackball in my case, with sound. And I want all of the same data and all of my thoughts and photos and everything available if I'm looking at it on my phone, or if I'm looking at it on my tablet computer, or if I'm looking at it on my watch. I want all of those things, and this is what the Xerox PARC folks were going for when they created all these technologies that we love. And so it's what we're missing is what Graham said, that sort of, you having your own computing image that follows you around. And we have that in various ways with cloud providers and so on, but we will not get it until, as Graham pointed out, the people at Nextcloud and the people at, the desktop environments and the people writing the applications are working together and sharing ideas. But I also think that we won't get it until we start removing the decades of cruft and legacy that we've built up to get to where we are. Because if I want to write an application in Smalltalk and have it run on all of my devices, I can do that today. But I can't share that with other people necessarily. And so I think that that's another avenue worth exploring, but I still think that the pragmatic approach is to bring free software Cocoa platforms, GNU Step in particular, forward so that we can have sort of an escape hatch from the badness of modern computing that we get from, even from Apple, which is, it seems weird to think of Apple as the good guy, but it also seems weird to think of Microsoft as a good guy too, but we didn't have Google back when Apple and Microsoft were the bad guys for other reasons, and we didn't have Facebook. And so I think that it's worth basically turning back the clock and saying, do we really need these things? Do we really need ZFS? Do we really need, a new file system for free software operating systems? Do we really need those? Because do we even need a file system? Do we need do we need 30 different programming languages if we have one that's simple? And I think that it's worth asking those questions. What things do we have because they're good? And what things do we have because they build neatly or not so neatly, but they build at all on top of previous ideas? I think that it's really, really important to periodically turn back the clock and ask, okay, what if we didn't have this? How would we do it differently now? In my hacking on operating systems projects for the Raspberry Pi 4, one of the things that I find really interesting is that Raspberry Pi OS is a Linux distribution, or a GNU and Linux distribution. That's what I would call it. I would call it a distribution. I would not call it an operating system, despite my earlier comments where I said that distributions are basically as different as different operating systems. But there's a difference. And when you say, I want an alternate operating system for my Raspberry Pi, you are basically offered different distributions of the same thing. It's really, really difficult to find documentation on how does a Raspberry Pi, or any computer, but I'm using the Raspberry Pi as an example because I like them and I have many. How does this computer boot? What is the first thing that it does when it powers on? And how do I write code to respond to that? Those are very difficult questions to answer, because people assume that once you have a Linux kernel booting on these things, it doesn't matter anymore. Android phones are that. the bringing up a new device, bringing up a new Android device from scratch is literally just a matter of getting the Linux kernel to boot to a certain point, and then everything else is, recompilation, and or a large percentage of everything else is recompilation. I realize that there may be pedants in the audience, so we've forgotten what does an operating system look like when it's not a traditional Unix looking operating system. And I think that it's important to reconsider those things. And when I'm working in Cocoa and AppKit, I want to deliberately not think about what Unix thing is running underneath. This was one of the patches that we had to make to Anti-Rsi, was we needed to pull out some code that was very Unix specific, but using Carbon APIs, and port it to APIs that would be GNU Step compatible. I think it's reasonable that GNU Step could run on something smaller than a Unix operating system, maybe something that doesn't even have a file system, maybe something that has a different memory management model. I think that those things are all possible because the abstraction is there, and I think it's pretty well done in a lot of ways. And so I think that GNU Step is an excellent compromise, and it's an excellent way forward from where we are today. But I still have this feeling in the back of my mind that we would have been better off if we had followed down Alan Kay's vision of the Dynabook. That is literally the computer I want. The computer I wanted, I was just saying to Graham before the show, the computer I wanted, the first time a computer came up that I really wanted to buy in a long time, was the Pine Tab 11-inch, which was the Pine Computing tablet computer. It was an 11-inch touchscreen with a battery and so on, and then you could attach a keyboard to it, which would make it act like an 11-inch laptop. But you could also attach a little dongle to it that connected it to a keyboard, mouse, power, and a monitor, and you could have that one computer that operated in a whole bunch of different places. Unfortunately, they stopped making it before I was able to before my number came up on the waiting list. But that's the kind of computing experience that I want to see in general. If we forget about all the sort of historical stuff, what I want is what Xerox PARC was trying to create with Smalltalk. And I think that the most practical way to get there is by pushing the free software GNU, GNU Step. I should stop trying to be abstract about the implementations of it, because it is GNU Step that I think is the way forward.
So what it brings for me is like the Apple platforms have long had a focus on a sort of consistency of vision and user experience, and indeed Next did as well. Next mostly did because it was really hard to do anything that wasn't using the Next controls and the widget set and their approach to UIs. Apple mostly because they had this sort of strong community sense of integration and of consistency and things. But the reason for that I consider doing this in a software freedom sense, because we could have just done a stream about how you can still use Objective-C in Xcode, right? And we could have built some Mac and tvOS and iOS apps and watchOS apps in Objective-C on Xcode, and got everything that we have discussed so far out of that that collection of technologies. But the promise that software freedom offers and has so far, to my mind, failed to deliver is the idea of truly personal computing, because the thing that you own is owned and controlled by you and not by anybody else. And you have to be a massive nerd in order to even discover how to do that. You need to be willing to get a reconditioned Lenovo ThinkPad computer, get Core Boot or Libre Boot flashed on it, get a thing, not even get Linux, but you have to get Trisquel GNU/Linux, and you have to go through all of this stuff and know what it is and know who to get it from and what all these things mean before you finally get a computer that is under your control. And that is a failing of the software freedom movement, that software freedom is only available to those in the know, but that it is an important part of having a thing that is entirely yours. If you look at Aral Balkan and Laura Kalbag, Indie in ind.ie, and their small web thing. That's basically, it's taking a bunch of commercial, sorry, not commercial, a bunch of open source off the shelf components, some Node, some Hugo, some npm modules, a few scripts, and then putting together an answer to the question, how can I run my own website? Not how can I get DigitalOcean to run my website, not how can I get GitHub to run my website, but how can I run my own website? The entire of the rest of the software freedom movement has not been answering that question, because it's been populated by people like us who nerd out on the technology, and so want to understand the technology, want to reach out and replace our bootloaders with non-proprietary blob-free bootloaders and all of this crap. So bringing that sort of simplicity and unity of vision to a truly personal and entirely under your control, because while we all excoriate the likes of Google for hoovering up data, the likes of Microsoft for hoovering up data, the likes of Facebook for hoovering up data, Apple do that as well. The difference is they haven't built a business model that's predicated on reselling insights derived from that data. They've built a business model that's predicated on reselling products that are predicated on insights that come from that data. But they're still,
and when they realize they can make money from it, they'll call it a really sweet solution.
And they're still in the same game, and very much I no longer feel like a Mac or similar device that I've configured my way. It feels like my computer anymore. There's a lot less sort of configuration, a lot less customization, a lot more secret moving parts. Like this thing that happened when Big Sur knew that Apple exempted some of their own network components from tools like Little Snitch, so you no longer know what's going on your computer. That kind of thing. Okay, not everybody cares what network components are going on their computer, but my point still stands. We have only got software freedom for people who are in the know, and we need to move forward on that. And the way to do that is to make free software trustworthy. And the way to make free software trustworthy is to demonstrate that we deserve that trust, and to demonstrate that there is value in placing that trust. And that has and it's a tiny part of the overall puzzle, but I think having a consistent and understandable vision of user experience is a chink in that trust, in breaking down the defenses against that trust. So oh yes, this software is like that software. This tool, I'm going to understand how to use it. I don't need to know, that GIMP is made out of one toolkit, and that Thunderbird is made out of another toolkit, and that Chrome is made out of a third toolkit, or whatever. I just need to know this is how I use my stuff. Like I say, it's a tiny part of that puzzle, but it is an important part nonetheless.
You reminded me of two thoughts. One of them is on my previous comment, but turning back the clock. one of the things that we used to do back before free software, well, before open source won the free software war, we used to have install fests. Matthew Scala and I used to participate in these together. We used to, hand out. We literally walked around and handed out pamphlets. We had pamphlets about the cleansing power of free software in pubs in Victoria, BC, and people would come to our install fests with their tower computers and sometimes their monitor, because it had to be paired with their specific monitor, and we would install Debian or Red Hat onto their computer and then show them how to set up their email and things. All through junior high school, I spent 100% of my weekends going to people's houses and helping them do on-site technical support so that they would keep using free software. And we don't really have those communities anymore, but computing is more ubiquitous now. Back in the mid 90s, people who had computers were still people who chose to have computers. It wasn't a necessary function of participating in society. I live in Sweden, where you have to have an Android or iOS smartphone in order to participate in society, because we have an authentication system called Bank ID, which is used either as a Windows or Mac app or as an iOS or Android app. And that's how you authenticate to get into your online banking. That's how you authenticate to pay your taxes. It's how you authenticate to pay your utility bills. And it's a level of convenience, but we don't have access to that on free software. There have been free implementations of it, and the Bank ID Corporation shuts them down. And then there's also a money transfer system. I don't carry cash in Sweden. I can't even tell you what cash in Sweden looks like. If you handed me something and told me that it was a 100 kroner note in Sweden, I wouldn't be able to tell you that it was not, just because I don't interact with cash ever, because we have these mobile apps that everyone uses, and you have to have them to participate in society. And you can do I'm only free software and I'm not going to participate in those things, but it creates so much overhead and so much annoyance for the people around you that it's not worth it socially. But I think that bringing back some of the community things and some of the support might help. And I hope that this stream is support, at least, in our nerd circles, but for people who are looking to port their applications, it's certainly helpful, I think, in some ways. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that I think that free software I think that my personal opinion is that the ideals of free software should be enshrined in law under right to repair status. And I really had high hopes, and Graham will laugh at this because we talked about it a lot at a museum. I really had high hopes when John Deere locked, using the DMCA, locked non-John Deere providers from working on tractors. I said, this is it. This is the turning point, because farmers will not put up with this shit. And it turns out that farmers that have enough money totally put up with this shit. So when you buy a John Deere tractor, it uploads all the data from your tractor about soil density and stuff to John Deere Cloud. And your neighbor at a competing farm can pay John Deere to get the soil information about your farm so that they can compare their farm to yours. And if you don't pay for that service, they still take your data from your tractor without you having any say in the matter. And you can't even take it to a mechanic that is not a John Deere licensed mechanic that promises to maintain these lock-ins. One of the things that has happened in a small scale is that some smaller farmers have decided to not buy new tractors. And there's some community around that. I'm certainly going to be a participant in this community because I have a 1960s tractor, and I'm going to post repair videos of it on YouTube. But I'm just one small person wanting to enable people to take control of their things. And for me, it's about when you own something, you should own it. And not necessarily in the ownership of property sense, but you should be able to do whatever you want with the thing. and that's really important to me. And that's why that's why I support free software, not because I think free software is important. I think the free software should be the default, and unfortunately, we don't have that now. And I really want to see that change. Um, it's really important to me that people are able to sustain themselves. If you want to fix your own car, you should be able to. Um, if you want to fix your own tractor, you should be able to. And if you want to fix your own computer, you should be able to. And those are things that are really fundamentally important to me, that I really want to see, I really want to see some change in. And that's one of the reasons why I participate in things like this, and why I think that free software is so important, because software is eating the world. And if we don't have software freedom, thanks to things like the DMCA, and even if you're not in the US, which I'm not, the DMCA affects you because of WTO and other things. I mean, Sweden's not even in NATO, but the DMCA applies here too in small ways. So I think that these are really important things, just for people to be able to use the things that they paid a lot of money for, and for people to have the freedom to choose what they want to do with those things. That's really, and those kinds of things are really important to me. And so that's what I'm hoping to get out of this stream.
I think that's an important thing that has been missed, both at large and actually by large chunks of the the traditional membership of the sort of software freedom community, is that like the whole idea about free software seems like some abstract thing about copyright licenses in in relation to things that you have to compile to turn into useful things, but it comes from a point of trying to extend like sort of civic freedoms and civic ideas of equity and fairness into a digital domain and into like the online world, and that is something that, in arguing over which GUI toolkit we're supposed to be using, in arguing over which like Linux distribution we want people to use, in arguing over whether we should say Linux distribution or GNU/Linux, all of these traditional sort of nerd snipey arguments that nerds in the free software community have, we have missed the fact that we have not been providing the awareness of or protection for those civic freedoms in the online domain. And so we've given the entire online domain over to monopoly capital.
Right. We've given software freedom to the people who deserve it least.
But
Amazon has complete software freedom.
We do at least know the correct way to pronounce Debian GNU/Linux when we're complaining that nobody uses it.
Right, but then when people started saying Debian GNU/Linux, we changed it, and so Debian is the old way, and now we're supposed to say GNU plus Linux.
Right, don't care. So let's do some code. Well, actually, why don't you introduce the Anti-RSI project while I go and take a comfort break, and then we'll catch up.
Sure. So like many nerds, and this seems to possibly affect Emacs users more than most, but Emacs is worth it. I suffer from RSI, and one of the best ways to limit your suffering from RSI is to take regular breaks from your computer. And one of the application that I use for that on a Mac is called Anti-Rsi. And it's been around since I think macOS Panther, and I've used it for as long as I've been a Mac user, and it hasn't had any updates, and it builds and runs just fine on every subsequent Mac release. And in order for me to be able to make use of a free software platform, I need to have Anti-RSI or a tool like it. And there are other tools that work. Workrave is a really good one if you are interested in that. But we wanted to see how hard it is or how easy it is to port a macOS Cocoa app to to GNU step. And we decided to start with Anti-RSI because it's a very, very small code base. I think the whole thing, I'm just going to look now, I think it's about 1,000 lines of code. I'm going to do star.hm. I'm just counting right now. It is 1,063 lines, total lines of code, and it uses now all Cocoa APIs, which are theoretically either supported by GNU Step or should be added to GNU Step. So we started working on that, and we found actually that as of last stream, Anti-RSI starts and runs and looks funny. So so it's been so far a great success, and we can continue on in this work and get Anti-RSI working on free software platforms, so that we can have both a useful tool that works cross-platform, but also so that we can sort of exercise our porting muscles and hopefully show other people how they can do the same thing. So that's what we're working on. As of last week, we had Anti-RSI running and doing the breaks, counting appropriately with some slight missing functionality, which we can add to GNU Step later. But the last thing we were working on is drawing the countdown timer in the doc badge. And I believe, Graham, it sounds like you're back. I see you typing.
I am back.
And moving windows. So I think I do not remember. I know that you got an email after our last stream. And I don't see it right here.
I don't know whether this person is watching, and I don't know what their Twitch handle is, but their name I can definitely tell you. I don't know whether we use names in Twitch land. Anyway, so Josh wrote and said, "Thank you and Stephen for doing the objc retain live streams. I've enjoyed the episodes so far. Well, please like and subscribe." Thank you very much. The image drawing issue that showed up at the end of your last episode appears to be a bug in Anti-RSI. It happens to work correctly on OS 10, but it's arguably undefined behavior. I'm going to take an aside at this point and say that one of the goals of GNU Step is to kind of be compatible with Cocoa. Now that's a hard thing to arrange because compatible with which version of Cocoa. But if something works on the Mac and doesn't work on GNU Step, which someone should probably make it work on GNU Step, even if the behavior on the Mac seems wrong. And this is one of those cases where what the Mac is doing seems wrong, or what Cocoa is doing.
Right, we should implement the bugs too.
Right. Although, actually, in this case, given the description of the bug, it's going to be easier to just fix it in Anti-RSI and move on.
Right.
So, when you lock focus on an NS image and draw something... so did you just... I missed most of your...
I did describe that we were working on drawing the countdown timer on the doc image.
On the doc image. Okay, good. Right. Yes. So that's the thing that doesn't work. And what we found was that it is drawing an image and setting that as the doc image. And we tried a few different things. We tried getting the doc icons window and adding an image view containing the image to that, and none of it worked. What Josh says is, when you lock focus on an NS image and draw something, the resulting pixel data is saved to an NS cached image rep in the image's representations. Now, we saw when we were logging this this image drawing code that we had an image that had no representations, and it turns out that is that is a problem, right? If you can't represent the image, then you're not going to be able to
because
display.
We could draw. We found that we could draw to the doc icon with other things, no problem. We put a text field there, and it was no problem.
We could add other
why
views.
the NS image wasn't. Yeah,
it was, and we saw other applications that were drawing images to the doc as well, just not ours. Anyway, before Anti-RSI locks and draws on its doc image, it manually sets the doc image's cache mode to NS image cache never, disallowing cached image reps from being stored in the image. This mode is mainly for saving memory in images that aren't drawn often. Well, obviously this one is drawn often because it's updated like
Every second.
Yeah. OS 10 ignores the cache setting during focus lock and saves the NS cache image rep anyways. GNU step follows the cache setting so the image remains empty and the drawing output is lost. So that's the problem, is that we were telling the thing not to store the result of our drawing, then drawing to it, and it wasn't being stored.
Do you think we should file a radar?
I think we have to file a feedback now with the same effect.
Right.
But yeah. So Josh carries on to say, removing the call to document check cache mode from Anti-Rsi awake from nib should fix the issue. Then goes on to say that we might need to fix some bindings problems to get it to draw correctly. So I propose that the first thing we do is remove that call and then just run it again and see whether we
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's try that. Yep. So I'm just going to double check that we are.
Yeah, we got annoyed. Oh, we didn't. Okay, you might want to just like reset all of that.
Yep. There we go. This is the TCR method, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. With a week between test and revert.
Right.
Well, 6 days actually.
Here we go. If we go Anti-RSI, and it's in AntiRSI.m because everything is in AntiRSI.m.
So you want to go to line 178.
Okay. Let's just take that out of there.
Yep.
And then we will build with build tool, right?
Yes. I think it might be build height. Oh no, it isn't. Ooh.
And
okay, that didn't work.
We've got some errors. Are these the things that we removed and we didn't commit? They are. Shit. Nice. We put if defs around that and forgot to commit it.
Okay, so.
Whoops.
Yep.
Okay. So, Anti-RSI 310. Let's go to search for CG. We know that the CG stuff does not exist, and it was all idle time related. So we're just gonna do if and def. Oh, I need a hash there, please. Is it apple or underscore apple underscore?
No, neither, because you want to. If you got if and def, then you want it
to right.
Be if and def GNU step.
Right. There we go. And then it's down to, I forget where the end of the, I think it's right here. Can I get a hash?
Yeah, I think you're right. But, oh yes. And then you need to give a constant value for, you need to now define a constant value for idle time in the opposite.
Right.
So actually need a hash else.
Yep. And let's just do this. I need a hash. And we we don't have CF time interval.
No, just change it to NS time interval.
And make it nil. Or just define it.
No, it needs to be big. If you look at.
Oh right, I need an equal sign. Can you just make it big?
Is it?
I can't have an equal sign either. Because of the way that we're doing this. Some of my keyboard things don't work. Greg is here, and he says he was unable to do his homework due to day job stuff. That is okay. Thank you very much for your effort. He says he's doing it today, and his homework was resource copying and some Gorm fixes. So, okay. And Core Graphics does exist partially in libsopal. Okay, so that's good to know for the future.
I was unable to do my day job because I was at a workshop, but don't tell the internet
that. Okay, what is the really big number we want here?
I think if you go up to here, that will probably do.
Oh. Okay. Let's
You could probably use like double max or something, but
Oh, come on. There we go. Just paste that in. I need a semicolon. Wow, I'm missing a lot of keys on this one. All right. Okay, so let's see if that builds. And then we should commit it almost immediately.
yep.
Process identifier not found.
Yeah, okay. So are we using the correct... because we also added that category to do the frontmost application stuff.
Oh, shit. We need to commit more often, Graham.
Yeah, we need to not listen when Graham says, "I'll just reset."
Okay. Can you do you remember how that category looks?
Yes. So, rather, I remember how to reverse engineer it from the things that are in the error. So, what the first thing we want to do is only define that if we're on Apple.
Yes.
And then, so it's NS Workspace frontmost application. So I have put a patch to GUI that contains this, but it hasn't. Sorry, and it has been accepted, but it hasn't been a release yet, and I'm still on like a released version of GUI, so I'm
right.
that's why that doesn't exist. We could like update GUI, but I think this is.
Let's not do that.
Yeah.
We have limited success with updating dependencies in the middle of the stream.
Yeah, that is true. Right, I think that is that. Oh, what is it about that particular T there? Right, I think that might be sufficient.
Let me try that.
Oh, although it also said process identifier, didn't it? Nope, that worked. Good.
That built. So then we need to copy the resources. That's in build.
Do we, or are they still there from the last time we built it? Because we haven't changed any of them.
Products, right?
Yeah. No,
and
the
it is
nib's
there.
Still there.
Yep. Okay. So we should be able to then build, and what is it called? Open app.
Yeah, but you can just run the invoke the executable directly.
Products Anti-Rsi. Contents?
No,
Anti-Rsi. There it is. There we go. Okay, so it's still not drawing.
Yeah, so all those no binding exposed things may be because the other thing that Josh said was, however, you'll also have to manually set the values of Anti-RSI's members that depend on bindings, i.e. draw, doc image, etc., or resolve the bindings issue to get it to draw correctly.
Right. Okay. So yeah, and there's the draw document.
But
one
we
that he
did.
was
We
talking
also
about specifically.
we also just did. You actually delete that other line? Because we decided that we were just going to make the build.
I did not delete
simpler.
that other line. I did just delete that other line. Yeah.
Okay. Well, shall we commit here anyway?
Yes, we should. Oh, you don't have Magit, do you? No. Okay, then we will do it the... Oh, piss off. You don't have my aliases, which of course nobody does. Okay. And there's the line that we removed, and the dog is being annoying again. And ns title. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to say commit.
You might want to add it before you commit it.
Oh yes.
Or just
you
do
are
commit
right.
say.
M. And we are. Let's see. Remove. Let's say. Fix compatibility issues for missing GNU step components. Okay, so that builds and runs. Now we need to fix our bindings issues. Now, bindings is a thing that I've worked almost not at all with. In fact, my only experience with bindings is in fixing bugs in Anti-Rsi on the Mac.
Right.
So I need you to drive this part because I have no idea. Let me run the app again so we get the errors in a nice wider window. And there are the no binding exposed. I do not know what no binding exposed means. Do you?
So, yes, I'm going to have to look up the exact invocation, but there is a method called expose binding.
Aha.
Let's use that one. So yes, the NS binding name is a type def for string, I think. So
Typically invoked in the class's initialize implementation. And okay, so I assume that Xcode or the Mac build tools are exposing the bindings automatically somehow.
I guess, or it just doesn't care. It just says, because if something is so, there's this idea of KVC and KVO compliance, and bindings should just work for anything that is KVC or KVO compliant. Sorry, that is both KVC and KVO compliant. KVC is key value coding, which basically says there is a method called value for key. There is a method called set value for key. I should probably pronounce the colons out loud, otherwise it becomes hard to follow. So value for key colon says give me the object that is what you think of when I give you this property name. Set value colon for key colon says set this object to the thing that you think of when I give you this property name. And then there's some extra methods that are to do with how you like index into collections using that that thing. But the idea is there's this consistent interface, and that means that you can work with any object without knowing what its accessor methods are or what its properties are, as long as you know these these KVC methods and you know the names of the properties that it has.
Right. Okay.
Which is kind of an indirection on top of an indirection, because you don't necessarily need to have implemented the methods directly in Objective-C anyway. But nonetheless, it gives it so KVO uses that. We'll find out shortly. Cocoa scripting, for example, uses that. You can turn an Apple script like get the color of the text of document 1 to document at index 1, get value of key for key text, get value for key color, and then you've built like a DSL that is your Apple script interface.
Right.
Key value observing adds a collection of methods on top of that that does it does observer pattern, hence the name. It does what Smalltalk MVC does, right? You say, I want to know when this thing changes, and something else goes, that thing changed, and then you find out about it. Anyone who does like Windows Forms or Xamarin Forms programming will recognize this as very similar to I notify property changed in in like C# land. So theoretically, bindings should work if the thing that you are binding from and the thing that you're binding to are both KVO compliant, because if either of them changes, you can get the notification and push the one to the other. Obviously, in practice, it wants these names, and that should be easy to do. So
there's a whole list of bindings somewhere. You can see it in Xcode when you look at the code map view. You can see it as a bunch of red, but we don't have that in Emacs. Well, I'm sure we have it in Emacs. We do not have it in this Emacs. There we go.
Yeah, so that is doing bind my property with this name. Okay. So what is probably happening here is that this doesn't have properties for those things. Because so KV, and again, it shouldn't matter. KVC, which all of this, like the bottom of the house of cards is KVC, and by default, KVC says if you don't have if you have accessor methods, then I'm going to use those. If you don't, then and you do have an instance variable of the same name, then I'm just going to directly write in and read that instance variable. And a load of people go, "Oh my god!" Right, data hiding, and turn that off.
Right.
So, like, again, none of this should matter, but we do actually need to expose these in this case to get this all to like connect up properly. So,
okay. So on now, I'm not sure. I see that it says it's expose binding is a method on NS key value binding create.
So it's a category on NS object.
Okay. So then we should be able to just self-expose binding in the name of the binding, right?
Yeah. Yes, but it's a class method, and no, we need to do it. If you look back at the documentation, the thing that you read out to me just now, this method is typically invoked in the class's initialized implementation. So what I was doing was searching for this class's initialized implementation. It doesn't have one, so we just need to write that method.
Okay. And we need one for each of these lines, right?
Yes, but luckily we've got that list of lines there. Eugene says, can you make Emacs's window a bit wider? I certainly can.
There we go. Okay, so then so this doesn't have an initialize method, so let's just make one at the top. And
no problem, Eugene 19. If it isn't readable, then it isn't useful.
Right. So
it's a plus because it's a class method.
Right. And do we need to type that? I can't do a plus.
All right. Yes, because it's void.
And so void initialize. And I can do. No, hang on. Nope, I can't do curly braces either. All right, and then here...
For people who are watching along, this is actually the most successful keyboard sharing that we've ever achieved.
Yeah, I think it's... I would agree with that. I need semicolon.
Oh. You know what? I'm going to do a semicolon, and then I'm going to yank that semicolon. I don't know what that...
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, and I can do self-expose binding at micro pause duration. Oh, now it has semicolons.
Yeah.
What we could do is we could prime the Emacs kill ring with everything I can't type.
Yeah, exactly. But it turns out that that's
Okay.
words as well as special characters. What we can also do here, just for shits and giggles, is compile at this point, run it, and check that we do shrink this collection of
That's a
errors.
really good
Otherwise,
idea.
you're going to do a lot of typing that doesn't do anything.
Oh, whoops. I need to build first.
Yeah.
And oh, it did not catch the nib that time.
But we've got, so now it looks like one of the bindings is working, but something is when it initially gets set, it's being set to nil, and that does cause an exception in
So it's
the KBC machine.
exiting before, or it's causing the exception before it loads the nib. Okay, so
no, it's causing the exception during loading the nib.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, because it's initializing Anti-Rsi when it loads the nib, right? That makes sense. Okay, so what did we do here? I'm a bit lost.
So micro pause period. Well, let's have a look at where it binds that. So it's where? Oh, come on. Right. So this is quite interesting, really, because this ordering of events tells me that it shouldn't be nil unless it's been set to nil. So the user defaults controller has this micro pause period number 4
Right.
in its initial values, and then this gets bound to values micro pause period. That means that the initial value that's set here should, if the framework is working correctly, be 4, not
Not nil.
not nil. Yeah.
But we're exposing the binding before we're setting the binding. So is it trying
We've got to expose the binding on initialize so that when it loads the nib, it knows that there is a binding for it to hook up.
Right.
Nothing we have done here has changed the value that gets set here. What it has changed is that this line no longer raises the error you are trying to do something that I don't believe you can do. It now raises the error, you are doing something that I can believe you can do, but in a way that I don't want you to do it.
Right.
What we could do, just as a hack to see if everything else is working, is implement set nil value for key. And see what fails instead now. Right.
Okay.
So now we do have a shorter list of errors.
We definitely do. Okay, so let's carry on with that. And we can solve this problem later, I guess.
Yeah. So sorry, we need to get back to your.
Sorry. I think we're both typing.
Yeah, you carry on. Type. You just need to go back to your initialize method. And
yep, there we go. Self-expose binding. Work break duration. That is not anything like the word duration. Can you yank another semicolon for me? Kill another semicolon, rather. Thank you. All right. I also didn't like previously having all of those errors when we were running. They were just kind of noise that made me feel bad.
So what we should have done was address them, because it turned out that they were noise that was meaningful signal.
Right. It occurs to me that we can figure out whatever we can do, as Eugene19 says in chat, put each symbol in a separate register of Emacs. And then I can figure out which key code I'm sending on those key presses and yank from that register.
Yeah.
Since this is a very
Well, we can also
reliable...
just write functions in the in the .emacs file that insert those characters at point, and then bind them to the keys you're pressing.
Right. I mean, we are doing this once a week, so it makes sense to do that if we need to reset session timer.
Oh, we can do that on our other stream as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. We use Emacs on the other stream as well. And the insert character at point hasn't changed in Emacs since Tico. So it will work on the older version of Emacs that we use on the other stream that we're not allowed to talk about on this stream.
Sorry, on DOS Amigans. I think the thing that Twitch are mainly annoyed about is if you say, "Oh, we're live on YouTube on this other day," or like, or we run an Amiga development stream on Thursdays. You have spelled binding incorrectly, isn't it?
I did. Oh, I wish I had an RSI timer for this typing that I'm doing.
Would you like me to do some typing? As
no, I'm joking. I'm using the appropriate keyboard, so it's not so bad. Okay, that should get rid of all the errors. I'm not sure if it'll do any drawing.
Now I'm wondering whether what happens now is that we still get so the possible outcomes are like the drawing starts working or the drawing stops working. As Mov01 said, which is what I'll come on to. If the drawing doesn't start working at this point, it's probably because all of these things are getting set to nil.
Right.
Or rather ignored because I'm choosing not to set them to nil. So, as Mov01 says, what we could do instead is replace look at the string name and use the value from the dictionary of defaults.
Mm-hmm. Is there a good reason why we're not setting up the bindings in the initialize rather than in the awake from nib?
Yes, because we need an instance to bind. Like what we're saying is this Anti-RSI object's lock focus field is bound to this NS user defaults controller's values.lock focus property or key path. So we need those things to exist. Why they aren't created actually in the nib itself and in code, I don't know because I don't know the history of this project. But the answer is because we don't have the information at this point.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's build using build tool, which has treated us very well so far. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, and because I've updated with Greg's latest fixes, we now get all of the compiler output in line, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we still have.
We're not getting the warnings, but we're still not getting the drawing.
Yeah. What happens if we?
Right. Start a work break. I swear I'm not touching anything.
Also nothing.
It should be drawing right now.
Okay, it
It is
ain't.
not.
Well, it isn't drawing something that we can see anyway.
Right.
Okay, and now we get a bunch of errors on quit.
Oh, well, that's also interesting.
NS user default did change notification.
Notification.
Blah blah. That's far too much information. Because it's giving me the entire of the NS user default thing. NS invalid argument exception reason instance does not recognize GS mutable set instance does not recognize lock focus. Okay. That suggests
lock focus is the thing that we do not that will not work on GNU Step.
Have we removed the whole method? Sorry, it's not a method, is it?
No, we haven't, and it's set to 0 by default, so it should never be being called on GNU Step.
So
it should only
right.
be called on Apple.
Right,
yeah.
But the fact that it is being bound to a mutable set, not to an instance of Anti-Rsi, presents a problem. So that could be that the nib loading has got the wrong object. It could be that there's a bug in here that it's binding to the wrong thing, although we weren't just looking at the binding code. And it is binding itself, as we can...
Yeah. So I have a thought. The places we're using the Cocoa bindings are in the user defaults, and those are changed in the preferences window, which we know renders. I wonder if we haven't yet tried to change any of the preferences on GNU Step and see if they're persisted. And it's possible there's some bugginess with the handling of
I would expect that NS user defaults works pretty well, because that's...
Right, but the usage of bindings in the preferences window might not work very well. And that might tell us that it's actually only ever getting the defaults rather than reading the preferences window changes. So I suspect if we change, say, the micropause the work break period in the preferences window, does that change? If that changes the duration of the work break, then we know that the bindings are working.
So we're... Yeah, Mov01's suggestion, temporarily comment out the bindings and just plug in the hard-coded values, will tell us whether we're going down the right path.
Yeah, that.
And then I like his other suggestion, their other suggestion of using that set nil. Overloading that, putting this initial thing as an instance variable and using it in both places. Because what we might be doing now, which I think is what Mov01 was alluding to there, is these never get set. These never get used because it's trying to set everything to nil. Right. So we ignore it, which means that they never get set, which means they're still nil. And then nothing ever overrides them. Right. Because if we don't touch the prefs window, let's see if we can get any... Okay, so let's look at the preferences. So everything is empty here.
Right, so those are not ever getting set.
Now that I have changed it, because I changed one thing, everything updated. So it is that the initial values aren't being propagated through. Now, I saw there's a hack line down here. Maybe that does different things on GNU Step and on Cocoa, but I also wouldn't expect this to be necessary.
Yep.
I would expect on self bind to object with key path that this would get the KVO notification with the initial value
Mhm.
as a result of that call. Anyway, now we know that all of these values are set. We can, because they will have values here, we can now ask the question: is it actually going to draw anything? And the answer is still no.
Right. Hmm.
Although we did also discover that what it's trying to draw is a different size than the app icon in.
Yeah, we did discover that as well. Hmm.
So I mean,
Okay,
we've
so
got too many things to investigate at the moment. We need to narrow it down.
yeah, the thing we discussed, I really like the idea of fixing the cocoa binding stuff because it gets rid of the error messages. But we did discuss last week as sort of plan B was that we put an image view on there and have it draw that way. But that's a fairly significant refactoring.
It's also not going to
And
change. Like, yeah, what seems to be happening is that the image isn't getting drawn.
right, right,
And so if the image isn't getting drawn and we draw it to an image view, or don't draw it to an image view,
right.
it still doesn't change anything.
Yep, yep. I wonder if we go to draw doc image. If there was oh no, it was a different thing where it was complaining about lock focus. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that's this. GS mutable set instance does not recognize lock focus.
Yeah, but this is not an unrecognized method exception. This is a
Invalid argument exception.
problem posting NS user defaults did change notification.
Right. Right. Hmm. If drawn doc image, self draw doc image. I wonder if because because we changed that. Draw document is a boolean that's set in the cocoa bindings.
Movement 1 says the bindings are connecting the preferences controller values to the members. So the prefs window showing values correctly doesn't mean that the members are being set, which is a good point.
That is a very good point.
What we could do is oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong keyboard there and I ended up changing scene in OBS. So where we have this, where is that? Here. So we've got this initial value, and all of the keys here are the names of the instance variables in this object.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure, yes, they all are. And all of the values are the appropriate initial values. So what we can do is here. How is it called? Key Enumerator.
I don't remember. But we're gonna find out.
Actually, I'm going to call that key. So what we can do is just set all of the IVARs to whatever was in that dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we get to find out whether I can Cocoa from memory or not. Yeah, I can.
You can reason about Cocoa from memory.
Okay, so this is useful information because... Ooh, okay, so we've still got that same error. And we also had, on every tick, it's saying, cannot determine type information for NS data malloc set. During posting a time with target blah and select a tick. Well, that's going to be on this object. That's the thing that draws tells the icon to draw. And it says instance variable of NS data malloc set. And that is evidently wrong because, you know, the things that have the set the method are things like the set classes, you know, NS set and NS mutable set.
Right.
So what this and that other exception together tell me is that there is, you know, there is an IVAR that is set to the wrong type of something, and that we should have had a so as Mov01 said, set being sent a lock focus message could be a memory issue like a missing retain. What all of this is telling me is that a type system would help us to reason about this code.
Right.
In fact, something that Josh said in his email is also the initialization of Anti-Rsi's background member, line 163 and away from nib, which might not be line 163 anymore, but we can start there, is missing a retain call.
We should have read the whole email.
Yeah. So, metax, go to line 163.
Welcome to Objective-C Retain, where we read emails poorly.
Yeah, awake from nib is what we're looking for.
Yep.
So here we go. Ah, yeah.
Huh.
Well, let's just check that fixing the one problem that we knew about isn't sufficient.
Well, maybe Apple is doing the Microsoft thing, and they're checking to see if we're running Anti-RSI and turning off memory checking.
Okay, so
we're still not.
We haven't fixed either of those problems.
Okay.
Okay, so let's have a look at what tick does. And does anything in here call the set? Ah, yeah, it would be a color, wouldn't it? You call set on colors.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is going to do it. This is all maths.
It's in draw doc image, I think.
Yeah.
Which is where it was getting, and when it's called draw doc image, the first line of draw doc image, which was where we were getting that method not found on GS mutable set.
Yeah, now, but that is definitely NS color clear color. This, however, might not be. Or that. And background is one of the things that we... So, what the thing tried to do with the background colour was it tried to deserialize it from an NS archiver. So that could be right, yes, I shouldn't have put those so this sets the background color to this background object, but in this dictionary we don't have the background object, we have a data, which we're then putting into down here.
And we're not unarchiving it first.
Yeah. So I'm just going to put that back. Check that I got that right. So is background a local or is it... No, it isn't. Okay, we need to not set elapsed taking and background in this initialization loop, which means that this loop is overly clever.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to not set any of the ones that are archived objects here. Oh. And I don't need to do that because I haven't just overwritten it.
Okay.
But I might have... This might have overwritten it, though.
Okay.
So I am going to take... Because this is a local... I think there may well be some like messy memory management in all this crap anyway, because it's retained and then it is set to the thing that it already has that value of.
Right.
So I don't like this code anyway, but I'm going to try that. And at some point we need to like clean up and commit something so that we don't make whatever mistake. Okay, so now we don't get the memory use bug, but we still also don't get drawing code. And we still get this other problem.
The GS mutable, yeah. So it thinks the draw doc image is a GS mutable set. Sorry, the doc image in draw doc image method. That is a GS mutable set, and we're expecting it to be an NS image.
Yeah, okay, so I think that there's a bunch of other memory management problems in this code. And I think that the easiest solution is for my homework to be to install scanbuild, and then for us to run scanbuild next week, which is the thing that you get if you run build and analyze in Xcode.
Right. Okay.
We have reached the end, so
Yes, we have.
Probably a good place to call it, and also a good
All
place
right.
for me to announce my secret announcement, which was that this. I've actually been watching this stream down on my phone because this stream has been a secret test of me streaming this to a free software RTMP server and then forwarding it to Twitch. So if you know people who aren't watching because they will only engage with fully free software, or if you yourself would rather watch it on a fully free platform, check out not now because I haven't written the post yet, but between now and the next episode I will post to the website information on where the stream is secretly also being broadcast as a what do they call it, HLS application.
Right. I know this is something that Matthew Scala in particular is interested in because he would like to move his stuff to fully free software as well.
Well, yeah, okay. So, I will do a blog post about that over the next. And
Greg is asking us to commit and push, so he can take a look as well. So okay, would you like that is probably a good idea. Let's do that. Have I got the right window? There we go. Git. Can we push from here?
Yes.
Not yet.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yep. Awesome. Okay, so that is push to master on the in the repo. I will type it in here. Is
And thanks, Greg, for offering to take a look. And anyone else
Thank
wants
you.
to...
Can you type some slashes, Graham?
Yeah.
I need 2 of them.
For the moment.
And one more. And one more. Oh, you're quick. Thank you. And we can... so it's available on the GitHubs, which is a non-free platform. No, GitHub is now a free software platform. For anyone who has GitHub Enterprise, congratulations, it is GPL2. I think we talked about why last stream. And there we go. Move01 suggests to please try at some point commenting out all the bindings and using hard-coded values. I think that might be a reasonable next step if we don't find the issues.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start.
I think so.
Next stream. I think we know there are memory problems, and so we can look into that, and then we can and then just give up on bindings. I think giving up on bindings would be a point where we also need to fix the Cocoa version of the app, because all those bindings will be will also be sort of implicated in the nib file, and so there'll be all sorts of changes that need to be made.
Yeah. And I want, part of the goal is to port it with as few changes as possible. And I would like to, if Cocoa bindings are a thing that people are going to use, then I would like for us to be able to say, GNU Step supports Cocoa bindings, and here are some of the things that you might not be taking into consideration that you ought to. I would rather not dumb down a Mac port just to fit the easy path on GNU Step. I would really like to sort of raise, either fix the code or raise GNU Step to the point where it's more portable.
Yeah, and bindings is from 10.3, so I expect that if there is anything wrong there, it is that this app is doing something wrong. That has been
I would expect that as well
on the Mac. Anyway,
Yeah.
that seems like a good place to call it. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined us, whether you've just been watching, whether you've been working on the chat, or whether you've been doing what we always welcome, which is actually doing the code for us from the chat. All of these things are valuable. Thanks very much.
Yeah, the community is a very important part of these things, and we really appreciate everybody taking their time to join us. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Yep, have a good time zone appropriate whatever comes up next.
Please like and subscribe.
Please like and subscribe.